The name of the story, Stars Over Sedona. The desert had a way of making time feel elastic. Rosa felt it in her bones every time she guided a group up the trails, the red rocks blazing like molten giants against the sky, so wide it seemed to bend around the earth. Today was no different, except for him. He stood apart from the others even before she knew his name. While the other 11 participants chattered excitedly about aura, cleansing, and energy lines, this one man kept his hands buried in his jeans pockets, his posture rigid as an iron rod stuck in sand. When Rosa spoke about vortex energy, his eyebrow arched the way a hawk hovers, ready to strike. This weekend, Rosa announced, her linen shawl catching the breeze, is about connection. To nature, to the cosmos, to each other. The group murmured their approval. The man said nothing. When Rosa's gaze swept across the semicircle, their eyes met. Briefly, just enough for her to catch the sharp clarity of gray beneath the brim of his baseball cap. He didn't look away immediately, and something in that cool steadiness pressed against her like a dare. Scientist, her intuition whispered. Or a lawyer. Definitely not a believer. The vans left them near the trailhead, and they started the gentle climb toward Cathedral Rock. Rosa loved this part. The first breath of juniper, the warm grit under sandals, the sky overhead like a chalice of blue fire. She spoke softly to the group as they walked, telling them about the indigenous stories of these lands, how the rock formations were once living beings. This area, she said, touching the air with her fingers as if painting something invisible, is a powerful energy vortex. You might feel tingling in your hands, lightness in your chest, a sense of alignment. Or the man said from the back, voice low but edged like glass, it might just be lower oxygen density at this elevation. A few chuckles rippled through the group. Rosa turned, her silver earrings glinting like twin stars. Spoken like a scientist, she said. Am I right? He met her gaze without apology. Astrophysicist. That explained the penetrating stare. Men who studied stars had a certain arrogance. Beautiful, but sharp like frost on glass. Well, Rosa said with a smile that was both warm and sharp enough to match him. Maybe you'll teach us something about the cosmos. Maybe, he said, voice neutral. If you're interested in facts. The challenge hung in the air, quiet but unmistakable. She let it linger before turning back to lead the way. By sunset, the group settled into the retreat center, a scattering of cabins and canvas tents tucked between red cliffs and whispering junipers. Rosa moved from guest to guest, helping them orient, laughing softly, radiating that easy serenity that made people trust her. But whenever she looked up, she found his eyes on her. Not constantly. He wasn't obvious, but enough for her to notice. Enough for heat to pool low in her stomach. When darkness fell, the stars came alive. The desert sky at night was cathedral dark, stitched with silver fire. The Milky Way spilled like crushed diamonds across black silk. Rosa led the group to the fire circle, where a small blaze cracked and hissed, painting their faces in flickering gold. They shared stories, childhood dreams, constellations they remembered, beliefs about destiny. Rosa listened, her shawl drawn tight against the cool night air, her heart swelling at the wonder in their voices. And then, from the circle's edge, his voice again. Calm, precise. Statistically speaking, he said, the idea of soulmates is almost zero probability. If the universe contains 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone, and billions of galaxies beyond, the odds of finding one person out of all conscious beings are exactly as they're meant to be. Rosa finished softly, turning her gaze on him. The fire caught in her eyes, deep and molten. Not everything true can be measured. A faint curve touched his mouth, almost a smile, but not quite. That's convenient. Truth usually is. The others laughed nervously, sensing the spark of something they couldn't name. Rosa held his gaze a beat longer than necessary, feeling a strange tug in her chest. Later, after the group drifted off to their tents, Rosa stayed by the dying fire. The night was thick with starlight, and the cool air smelled of sage. She tilted her head back, exhaling a prayer only the stars could hear. Couldn't sleep either. His voice startled her, not because it was loud, but because it slid into the quiet like a blade. She turned to see him standing a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, face half-shadowed. "No," she said, "too beautiful to waste on sleep." He came closer, the firelight brushing his jaw, turning steel into bronze. "You really believe that stuff, don't you? The vortex? The soulmates? The energy of the universe?" She smiled faintly. Every breath of it. He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes silvered by starlight. "Why?" "Because I felt it," she said simply. He almost laughed, almost. "Feelings aren't evidence. Neither is love," she whispered. "But people build their lives on it." Something flickered across his face, something that wasn't mockery. He sat down beside her, closer than politeness required, close enough that their knees almost brushed. The fire popped softly between them. Above, a shooting star seared the dark, leaving a trail of white flame. "Make a wish," she said. He shook his head, but his voice was low when he answered, "I don't believe in wishes." "Then what do you believe in?" He hesitated. "Then patterns, equations, things that don't change." Rosa smiled, her heart thudding in a way that felt like change. "Maybe some things change because they're supposed to." Their eyes held across the firelight, and for one breathless moment, the vastness of the universe narrowed to the space between them. The desert night was colder than Ben expected. Even with his jacket zipped to the throat, the wind sliced through him as he followed Rosa up the ridge. The others had chosen to stay behind at the fire circle, but Rosa had announced a special vantage point for the meteor shower, and of course, he couldn't resist. Not that he cared about the shower. He'd seen hundreds from mountaintop observatories with million-dollar telescopes. But the alternative was lying in his tent, staring at the nylon ceiling, thinking about her voice curling through the dark like smoke. They climbed in silence, their flashlights cutting narrow tunnels of white through the ink. Juniper branches whispered as they passed. The rocks still held the ghost of heat from the day. At the top, the land fell away in vast shadows, and the sky, the sky, exploded with stars. The Milky Way arched like a river of crushed glass. The first meteor tore across it, leaving a white wound in the dark. Rosa spread her shawl on the ground and sat, patting the space beside her. Ben hesitated only a second before lowering himself onto the cold stone. Their shoulders didn't touch, but he could feel the heat of her body in the chill air. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she whispered. "Predictable," he said. "The Perseids peak every August." She laughed softly. "You're determined to drain the magic out of everything, aren't you?" "Not magic," he said, watching another streak of fire split the night. "Physics. Physics can't explain why my chest feels like this." She pressed a hand over her heart. "Elevated heartbeat from the climb," he said dryly. "Or suggestibility." Her head turned, eyes dark and bright at once. "And what about you, Professor Skeptic? You're out here, freezing, when you could be warm in your tent. Why?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The answer that wanted to come out wasn't something he was ready to admit. Not to her. Not to himself. "Habit," he said instead. "I like patterns. I like knowing where things will be before they happen." "And people?" she asked softly. "Do you like knowing them before they happen too?" Her words slid under his ribs like a blade. He stared at the stars, the meteors burning out one by one like dying thoughts. "People are unpredictable," he said finally. "And that scares you." He looked at her then, really looked. Her hair shimmered like liquid copper in the starlight. Her lips curved, not in mockery, but in something gentler. "It's not fear," he said, his voice lower now. "It's unnecessary chaos. Or maybe it's life," she whispered. A meteor blazed, brighter than the rest, a green-white arc that carved silence between them. Rosa drew in a breath like prayer. Ben didn't breathe at all. When he finally exhaled, it sounded like surrender. The storm came the next day. It started as a low growl in the east, the kind that made desert animals vanish into burrows. By afternoon, the sky was an iron lid, and rain came down like sheets of molten glass. The group scattered to their cabins, laughing and squealing, sandals slapping mud. Rosa ran through the downpour, shawl clutched over her head, her hair whipping like a flame. Ben followed, water stinging his eyes, boots sinking in red clay. When they reached the row of guest cabins, Rosa fumbled with her key and cursed softly. "What?" he asked, pushing wet hair out his eyes. "They gave my cabin to someone else," she said, blowing a wet curl from her face. "I was supposed to be in the staff lodge, but the leak," she glanced at him, rain sliding down her cheek like silver threads. "Yours is closest." He stared at her, water dripping from his chin. "You want to borrow your couch," she said. "Unless you want me to drown out here." He hesitated. Not because he didn't want her inside. God help him, he wanted it too much, but because the thought of being in four walls with her felt more dangerous than lightning. "Fine," he said gruffly. The cabin smelled of cedar and damp wool. Ben lit the single lamp, its glow soft and honeyed. Rosa peeled off her soaked shawl, draping it over a chair, then bent to untie her sandals. Wet fabric clung to her like a second skin, and Ben had to look away, at the rain streaking the window, at the books stacked on the nightstand, anywhere but her. "You're shivering," he said. "Here." He grabbed a towel from his duffel and held it out. She took it with a smile that hit him like a comet. "Thank you." When she brushed past him toward the heater, her bare arm grazed his. Just a whisper of skin, but enough. Enough to set his nerves on fire. For a while, the only sound was rain hammering the roof, the soft hiss of the heater, the frantic pulse of his own heart. "You really don't believe in anything you can't measure?" she asked suddenly, turning to face him. Her hair was a dark river down her back, beads of water glimmering like stars. "I believe in evidence," he said. "Repeatable results. Things that don't lie." "And what about wonder?" He almost smiled. "That's just a chemical reaction in the brain." "So, is love," she said quietly. Their eyes locked, and the air changed, thickened, charged, like the sky before lightning strikes. He took a step toward her without meaning to. She didn't move, didn't blink. Outside, thunder rolled like a distant drum. Inside, something far louder broke loose between them. The rain stopped sometime after midnight. Ben woke to a silence, so deep it felt like velvet pressing against his ears. The heater hummed softly. Across the cabin, Rosa slept curled on the couch beneath a borrowed blanket, her copper hair spilling like molten metal over the pillow. He lay there longer than he should have, studying the delicate rise and fall of her breath, the faint furrow in her brow even in sleep. It stirred something in him, a strange tenderness he didn't know how to name. At dawn, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy and golden, and when they met his, the room felt too small for the two of them. "Morning," she whispered. "Morning." His voice came out rougher than he intended. She sat up slowly, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was something else, something vast and shimmering, like the sky after rain. "I should check on the group," she said. "Make sure no one floated away." "Right," he said, but when she stood to leave, he heard himself say, "Wait." She paused, hand on the doorknob. "Tonight," he said, "meet me by the ridge, where we watched the meteors." Her head tilted, curiosity softening her mouth into a smile. "Why? Just meet me." He spent the day building. It wasn't much, just a simple refractor telescope, stripped down to essentials. He'd brought spare lenses for his camera gear, and with some scavenged wood from the maintenance shed, he cobbled together something functional. Not pretty, not perfect, but his hands ached with the need to make it. For her. By sunset, the sky was a bruise of violet and gold. He carried the telescope up the ridge, breath steaming in the cool air, heart thudding like he'd hiked a mile higher than he had. Rosa was already there, shawl fluttering in the wind, her silhouette etched in firelight against the bleeding horizon. When she saw what he carried, her lips parted in surprise. "You built this." He set the telescope down gently, adjusting the tripod so it faced the newborn night. "It's not much, but works." She stepped closer, her eyes shining like stars reflected in water. "What?" Ben swallowed. The truth felt like glass in his throat, but he let it cut on the way out. Because I wanted you to see what I see, he said softly. Not equations, not probabilities, just wonder. Her breath caught. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she reached out, brushing her fingers against his, light as starlight. Show me, she whispered. The first star snapped into focus, a diamond of ice and fire, suspended in black eternity. Rosa bent over the eyepiece, her breath fogging in the cold, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet. It's so her voice broke. It's like touching forever. Ben smiled faintly, a curve that felt new on his face. That's what I've been trying to tell you. She laughed through her tears. And here I thought you didn't believe in magic. Maybe I just didn't understand the definition. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full of stars, of breath, of something unspoken that pulsed like a secret heartbeat between them. Rosa stepped closer until her shawl brushed his jacket. Her hand rose, hesitant, then sure, and cupped his jaw. Ben, she whispered, and the way she said his name was a constellation in itself. He didn't think, didn't calculate. For once in his life, he let the pattern break. His mouth found hers like a meteor burning through dark, sudden, fierce, bright enough to scar the night. Much later, they lay on a stone, the telescope cooling beside them, the stars spilling eternity overhead. Her head rested on his shoulder, her fingers tracing constellations across his chest. Do you still think everything is just math? She murmured. He looked at the sky, then at her, at the curve of her smile, the heat of her hand, the improbable, impossible fact of her next to him. No, he said quietly. Not everything. The universe stretched out above them, vast and indifferent. And for the first time, Ben didn't mind. Because here, in this improbable corner of infinity, something had aligned. Not by chance, not by design, but by something neither of them could measure. Something that felt a lot like gravity. The stars thinned toward dawn, paling as the eastern sky blushed with rose and gold. Rosa stirred against his shoulder, murmuring something soft, then went still again. Ben lay awake, watching the curve of her cheek gilded by first light, the copper in her hair turned molten by the sunrise. He'd spent years mapping galaxies, calculating distances in cold numbers. Yet nothing felt as vast or as terrifying as this. Her head on his chest, her breath sinking with his heartbeat, the fragile miracle of two bodies anchored to the same small patch of stone in an endless universe. When she finally opened her eyes, the day had fully broken. They were warm honey, liquid and bright, and they looked at him as if seeing through every layer he'd built. Morning, she whispered, voice husky with sleep. He smiled, really smiled, not the faint, guarded curve he'd worn before. Morning. For a while, they just looked at each other, as if the language of starlight still lingered between them. Then reality intruded. The distant sound of voices, the faint hum of engines from the retreat center. I have to check on the group, Rosa said reluctantly, sitting up and pulling the shawl tighter around her. They'll wonder where I disappeared to. Ben nodded, though the thought of her walking away made something clench inside him. Right, of course. She hesitated, searching his face. You'll still be here? He almost laughed. I'm not going anywhere. Her smile was soft, unsteady. She touched his cheek, just a brush of fingers, like tracing the edge of a memory, then stood and walked down the slope, her figure haloed by morning light until the desert swallowed her. He stayed on the ridge long after she was gone, staring at the telescope. It looked small and clumsy now, its tripod legs crooked on the uneven rock. And yet, it was the most important thing he'd ever built. Not because it showed her the stars, but because it showed him something he couldn't quantify, that the most precise patterns in the universe still allowed for chaos. Beautiful, necessary chaos. When he finally returned to camp, the retreat was winding down. People hugged, exchanged phone numbers, promised to keep in touch. Rosa was everywhere, laughing, helping load bags into vans, her presence like sunlight. But every so often, her gaze slid to his across the chaos, and each time it did, the world narrowed to that single thread between them. As the last van pulled away, She walked to him slowly, the wind tugging at her shawl like a teasing hand. "So," she said, tilting her head, "back to the stars." He met her eyes, gray reflecting gold. Not the same way. Her lips curved, a secret blooming like dawn. "Good." He opened his mouth to ask, "What now?" But she pressed a finger to his lips, silencing the question before it could break the fragile thing they built. "Come back to Sedona," she whispered, "when the Perseids return." He nodded, the promise settling in him like gravity. Then she was gone, vanishing down the trail with her shawl snapping in the wind, a figure carved from copper and light. Ben stood there until the desert swallowed her again, the sun blazing white above the red cliffs. When he finally turned to leave, he glanced once more at the sky, pale now, washed almost clean of stars, but in his mind they still burned. Not cold, not distant, not patterns on a chart, just fire. And maybe, just maybe, something like love. The end. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.